Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick and I'm talking with Steve Shah of Citrix. Steve, good to meet you and thanks for talking to us.
Good to meet you as well.
Citrix is known primarily as a virtualization player, but you're also into networks, are you not? Tell us about that.
Citrix is actually very significantly into networking. It's a $700+ million line of business for us, dominated primarily by an application delivery controller. Most people know it as a load balancer. And we've had a lot of success in a variety of markets, including the telecom market. So it's not just telecom, but it's also enterprise, service provider, and e-commerce.
We're going to talk about NFV, which is very much the flavor of the past 3.5 years, and still is. NFV is now sufficiently advanced and well enough understood to provide service providers with the ability necessary to control costs and accelerate revenue growth by leveraging standard IT virtualization and orchestration technologies to consolidate network equipment functions onto industry standard high volume servers and switches and storage and so on. Are there pieces missing in the form of new equipment based on traditionally more demanding telco technologies? Are there gaps in the jigsaw?
I don't think there is. And the reason I say that is because we've actually been doing software in infrastructure for a very long time. It goes back over 10 years now. The e-commerce guys have been doing it for a long time. We learned from the other service providers. And I think even in the telecom space, we've observed how cloud technologies have come in and really built up NFV for some period of time. This has given us a lot of experience to know what all the technical pieces are. The part that's missing and is still being really fleshed out for a lot of organizations is the organizational piece. It's the teams, the operational styles, how we automate things, how we really take advantage of the fact that we now have this infrastructure that's incredibly malleable and we're moving away from that box thinking. So that's really the big shift that we're seeing, and something that it's not unique to telecom. Everyone who's gone virtual has gone through this experience.
Okay, moving on then. Business, enterprise and consumer demand for cloud and video streaming and social networking and mobile broadband services isn't just driving traffic growth, but it's also driving user expectation of what service providers can actually provide, inexpensively and on demand. Do you think NFV will permit network operators, carriers and service providers to do so, or are they riding for a fall, potentially, that will come if the NFV service realities fall short of what users have been led to expect they're going to get?
The technology itself gives you that flexibility to really achieve that top line growth, and that's what we're after. There's a heavy emphasis that we tend to place on CapEx and OpEx savings, when really the big opportunity here is being able to redefine our services on a whim. So when something new comes up, being able to turn a new application, push it out there, and at least run trials and figure out what customers want and iterate quickly, that's something we can do with software that was really hard to do with hardware before. So the thing that got them was that they had to change the way that they worked. They had to operationalize differently, they had to automate differently, and so on. And, it goes back to the previous question you had asked. And I'll give you a specific example. There was an organization we were working with. They were going to automate their firewalls. The way they figured it was that they can automate their firewalls, they can get anything else done. And it makes sense. Hundreds of thousands of policies, multiple geographies, the order of complexity felt very real to them. So their expectation was that the bulk of their work was going to be really rattling the cages of their technology providers. Is there an API for this? How do I automate this? Do you have a virtual machine for it, etc.? What they found was that it was actually about 20% of their work, because the virtual machines existed for a lot of these things that they wanted. The APIs did exist. What was missing was the way that they had to take their operations. How does one request an app firewall change? And when you request a firewall change, how does it manifest? Where does it go to? How do you automate this process, speed it up, etc.? That was the thing that took a little longer for them, but then once they figured it out, they started applying it in other places. So they could apply it to their load balancers and so on, and really make it possible for the app developers to drive the transformation very quickly. And then going back to whether or not there's top line growth, when the app developers can make quick changes to the infrastructure in a cloud-like manner, now you're talking about the ability to get the business agility that we were all promised with virtualization.
What do you think in terms of the user experience and expectation? Will they get what they've been promised?
So end users, I assume you're referring to.
Yes.
End users should. This is a proven technology in that regard. We've done this in the e-commerce world now for 15 years. So, can we stream video globally to billions of people simultaneously? Yes, we've proven that. YouTube does that. Can we do social media, billions of people simultaneously? Yes, Facebook's proven that. We know that software gives us that malleability and the automation to be able to go and stand up this infrastructure quickly, all makes it possible to be able to go and make this stuff happen quickly. We know we can do it. It's now getting the organizations behind it to make it possible.
NFV should allow operators to drink profitably from new revenue streams. That's what it's all about. But the quid pro quo is ever shortening life cycles for apps and services, and that puts pressure on costs, of course. The question is, what will happen if these costs fail to scale well with traffic growth and thus inhibit speedy and profitable service innovation of the type you've just been talking about?
Ooh, that's a tough one, because the heart of making it work is really changing the way we write our applications. In the traditional way of writing applications, we would write large monolithic applications, large teams of people. And the more complex they got, the bigger the team became, and the slower the team became. So supporting those rapid life cycles becomes really difficult. The shift in development is, of course, towards agile. That's the buzzword of the day. Everyone wants to do it and figure out how to get there. We have to look at what makes Agile successful and what makes it click for scale. And that is, they've successfully broken these problems down into individual modules where the modules can actually be developed independently. So now, if one team finishes their module, that's great. And if they need to make changes, as long as their API doesn't change, they're all good. So coming back to the business, we're able to go and see these applications get larger. It's for these applications to scale horizontally, without having to worry about necessarily scaling the development teams and the automation teams behind it. The modules become very small, self-contained pieces of it, and it's what makes it possible for organizations to still remain very efficient.
Now, NFV is regarded as being not even generational, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for CSPs, as it is a completely new platform on which they can build service innovation and business innovation. However, network operator business models are actually threatened by, as you know, slowing revenue growth, even as user demand rises and carrying on going through the roof. Add to that the fact that for the foreseeable future anyway, the networks of tomorrow will actually be a hybrid mix of purpose-built legacy equipment and the new network virtualization kit, SDN, cloud and 5G technologies. The big question is, how are these all going to play together? This world that we're entering is not black and white. It's software and hardware, and it's going to continue to be like that for some time. So what's the prognosis?
The hard part about this is getting a solution where you're talking to a set of sources, vendors, and partners that understand and appreciate that it is two modes of operations for a while to come. And so how do you go and find that commonality between these two sides so that, for instance, with a software base, you want one software base that applies to both the hardware and the software. You don't want to suddenly find yourself using a different vendor for the software and so on. This means that when changes happen, they change to both. When logs get generated, they happen on both. When APIs get called, they happen on both. So as you take the broader ecosystem around all of this infrastructure and build out, you're not suddenly having to redefine the ecosystem each time you make a transition from hardware to software, or decide that you want to leave things hardware for a certain value of it. So the black and white piece is, finding somebody who's able to be gray as a partner will be key. Now, how does that turn into someone that wants to be profitable about this and find that income? The goal with making all of these infrastructure pieces automatable means that we are finding those OpEx reductions. So as we horizontally scale out this infrastructure and make it larger, we're just letting some software routine go and run that many more times. We're not having to go and scale out the organization to support that kind of load. I'll give you an example again from the .com side of the world, because they've seen similar kinds of scale. In the .com and cloud side, I've seen teams as small as 10 people manage thousands of load balancers worldwide, right? This is our specialty, we see it all the time. Scaling out to thousands of load balancers worldwide with a small team of people is rooted in the fact that they went and automated. So as they added another load balancer, they didn't have to add a headcount to it, they just let their code run one more time. Very efficient, and that's where they found their savings. Now, as the business grew, as the number of users grew, as the volume of data transferred and the billable content transferred grew, they weren't having to grow out their expenses at the same time.
Transformation is a technological problem. Obviously, it's also, as we are becoming more and more aware, an organisational problem as well. It's about people. The world is about people. That's why we're here. So, take an example from the enterprise space, places things like e-commerce and so on. What would your advice be to those that are thinking of just starting along this journey?
You definitely want to look at your partner ecosystem first and foremost, because you want to know that you're picking partners that are going to be with you on a 5-year journey. So if you are still dealing in hardware, can you find somebody that can work in both hardware and software and isn't going to be afraid of that transition? So if I can get that same piece of software in a physical form factor and I can get it in a one of these newfangled containers, then I've got somebody who is investing with me over the long term. That's one of the big pieces of it. The second big piece around this is, what is it going to take for our teams to get transformed along the way? So an education plan has to be a part of this. Now, different organizations have taken different levels of strictness with that. Some of them have been, that will change or we get rid of you. Others have been more, hey, how do we go and actually retrain and retrench? Regardless of what it is, figuring out what your end state is and backing into the education required and the talent required to support that will be sort of that critical dimension of it. And that may mean changing the way that we organize our teams altogether. I'll give you an example. An organization we were talking to that was in the middle of this transformation, what they were realizing was that they needed to hire software engineers, something that they had never done in their IT group before. They needed to hire software developers who could automate infrastructure. And so they were getting a new type of IT person. And this did mean that at some point they needed to restructure the people who were bit bangers, go out there, log in on the command line and make changes. They didn't need as many of the command line guys, they needed more of the scripters. It wasn't all or nothing. You ended up still with both because the operational experience of somebody who's been doing this for dozens of years is invaluable. You can't replace that with some 22-year-old who's hacking on code. But at the same time, that 22-year-old hacking on code is going to know how to put together a mashup far faster than any of us people here. That balance and that rebalancing is really sort of that organizational change that we're going to have to go through, and it's going to be one that's going to take some time. But don't think in terms of 6-month stints. We need to quit saying that I'm going to NFV in 6 months. That's not going to happen. Think more in terms of 3 to 5 years, and that's a realistic timeline.
Thanks, Steve. Last question to you. Back to Citrix. What's next then for Citrix? You're in the middle of the transformation of the network. You're heavily involved in it. You are involved in real-life deployments. So what's next?
Really, that transformation to software is very key for us. We see that the move towards cloud services, the move towards the software versions of our products are key. And so one of the core strategic decisions we've made is that we will maintain one body of code, and figuring out how that one body of code is going to apply to all of these different formats and integrate into these new systems has really been fundamental to our roadmap. So I'll give you an example. We announced a relationship with Mesosphere. Mesosphere, we have an integration with them. Now you get this ecosystem that's able to go and drop workloads into a large pool of compute capacity and change those up on a minute-by-minute basis and redefine the network along the way. Now, it sounds terrifying to somebody who's been used to a hardware environment, but we've seen it work at scale. We've seen it work at scale with a cloud provider that's providing 24/7 service for large numbers of people. We know this can really be pulled together. For us, being able to go and take that experience we've done and bring it into the telecom world is really a big step. So not only are we going to maintain one source code base between hardware and software, but now taking all the experiences of large-scale e-commerce and telecom and bringing them together is going to be part of our roadmap as well.
Tricky task, but an entertaining one, I suppose.
It is a very entertaining one, and I have a good time doing it.
Steve Shah, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.